And I the day yesterday on the role of the media in agenda setting and how that agenda setting by the media can be informed by election-related surveys. And one of the points that came up was an encouragement to the media, as well as us who were doing the surveys, to try to get beyond the what to the why. That is, not just who is leading or how much different candidates or parties, how much support they have, but why across the country and even within different communities in Kenya, certain people are attracted to one candidate or party or another. And that's, in a way, a kind of an academic political sociology analysis, but we hope that we'll at least indicate today in some of our results some ideas about that. So we can then have a discussion. Yes, I think I've covered most of these points as to what the survey is covering. Just the last point at the bottom here, that in the last couple of weeks since our previous survey in the middle of May, we've had the finalization by IEBC of the presidential ballot slate, so that we now have a total of 4 candidates. That is, in addition to Raila Odinga and William Ruto, we have George Wajakoya and David Maure Wahiga. And of course, the question that has arisen and has received some media attention is whether the presence of these 2 additional candidates, however unlikely it is, if that's fair to say that either of one would win, whether their presence on the ballot might push the country into a second round runoff contest. So we need to keep that in mind as we're looking at these figures today and also our subsequent surveys. So I think, of course, one other issue, a question that we try to answer and which we think the results of this survey do answer is, over the last 2 years, what has been the trend in popularity or support for these 2 candidates, and now with their running mates, all 4 of them, and especially in the last 6 weeks since the running mates of the main 2 candidates were announced, what has been the change, if any, in their standing among likely voters. So as Maggie said, the first sort of section or topic that we addressed is on voter registration status. And we began by asking people to declare themselves. We had no way of verifying it. We're not an investigating agency, whether they are registered voters. More than 9 out of 10 said they were. Slightly more men than women, and slightly fewer younger people, 84% rather than up in the higher 90s for those in higher age groupings. The fact that IEBC reported that they only managed to register slightly over 2 million, only about 1/3 of their target in their last voter registration drive. And they stated also that they were particularly disappointed that they didn't get more response in terms of registering from younger people. I think these figures bear that out. Even if we know that if there are just over 22 million registered people in the country, 94%, and we know from census data that there are about 85% of people in the 85% of the adult population are actually registered based on the census data, as I said. So we know that some of these people, some of our respondents, were not entirely honest about their registration status. Perhaps they wanted to look like good citizens, but nevertheless, the variation does indicate the reality that we know. To get a little better feeling of who was registered, we then asked people if they could name their voter registration, their place of registration. Sorry, before we get to that, this just shows the spread of registration across the country through the 9 zones that we use, with a high in Lower Eastern and also Western, 97, 96%, and the lowest figures in the Coast and South Rift. And then, as I said, we asked everyone who said they were registered if they could name their polling station, and not everybody could. And you can see the distribution, slightly more men than women who could name their polling station. Now, we should say that the fact that they could not name the polling station doesn't mean that they definitely lied to us about being registered. I think there are at least two reasons why some people legitimately couldn't name their polling station. Some people might know very well where it is, but just in the situation of the interview, they couldn't remember the name, whether it's a primary school or whatever it is. Second, some people in the last year have sought to transfer their place of registration from one polling station to another for whatever reasons of convenience. And we saw at the forum yesterday, or I think it was on Citizen News last night, I think only about 1/3 at the most, maybe even lower than that, people according to IEBC had checked the register electronically to make sure that they had moved. So some of these people who are definitely registered, as I say, probably didn't give us the name of their polling station. They could not because they hadn't yet verified whether they had successfully changed their place of registration. I recall before the last election, IEBC put out an SMS number so people could use their phone and just key in that number, send the message, and get confirmation that they were registered. I think someone told me yesterday that that has recently been done, but we need to check that. For those few who admitted, just 6%, that they were not registered, we asked why. And you can see the distribution of reasons. Almost half said that during the registration periods, 43% were too busy. 1/5 of those, 19%, who said they weren't registered, said because they've never had an ID or a passport. Slightly fewer said that they just lacked faith that whoever they vote for will make a difference in their life. 5% of them said that they didn't have faith in the integrity of the electoral process, and another 5% said they had had an ID or a passport at some point in the past, but they had lost it, hadn't been replaced. Maybe like me, they're waiting for their Huduma ID. And then there were 16% who didn't give a response to this question. Of all those people who declared they were registered, we then asked them how likely they thought it was that they would actually vote on 9th of August. And we read out these responses that they would definitely not vote, they probably will not vote, they will probably vote, and they will definitely vote. And you could see those who said they will definitely vote is slightly over 2/3 at 70%. Those who definitely will not vote, 10%. And then the rest are in the middle. And when we compared those who had expressed elsewhere in the survey that they were going to vote for Raila Odinga or William Ruto, we looked at these numbers in terms of those various answers. We don't see any difference. So at least at this level, how people are thinking now about their likelihood of voting, we don't see any advantage for either presidential candidate. The numbers are just, well, statistically they're identical. Of course, we don't know on election day. There could be very bad weather in certain places, maybe some security challenges that could affect turnout in a differential way. But at this point, we don't see among those who are registered any difference, as I said. Across the country, the same question, disaggregated, the declared likelihood of voting, highest in Nairobi, Nyanza, and Western, and lowest at the coast. That's a range of 74% at the high end, down to 57% at the low end, of those who would definitely vote. Now, if we take the example of Coast, the 57%, and we add to it the 18% who said they will likely vote, that takes us up to 75%, as opposed to 85% if we combine those two categories for Nairobi. And for anyone who's interested or curious as to why this even declared level of interest in voting is lowest at the coast, I checked the actual voter turnout in 2017, and it was actually lowest in the coast for any of the other regions in Kenya. I think it was 64% only. Even in 2013, voter turnout was at the coast, was lowest in the country. Why that is a question for research, political sociology, perhaps, but we could discuss that in another occasion. Now, just for fun, perhaps, those who had said they were not registered were asked that question as well. There were only 85 of them, but interestingly, only between 1/2 and 2/3 of those who are not registered, who told us they weren't registered, said they definitely will not vote. Another 10% said they weren't sure if they were going to vote or not. And 11% said they definitely would vote. Now, maybe, Maggie, if we asked this question next time, we would say, by the way, how are you so sure you're going to vote if you told us a minute ago that you're not even registered? Maybe they have a way of voting that nobody else knows about. But we just thought this was interesting to just go a little bit deeper into the mindset of people who had declared that they were not registered. Now we get to our second section on political parties and coalitions, and we have 3 issues we're looking at. First, their alignment to a political party, not membership, but just which one they support. And then, if in the last 10 years they supported any other party, and what that party was, because we have had so much movement between the last election and this election season, and then to the political coalitions. As of now, and this has been the case over the last year, UDA remains the most popular party. 1/3 of Kenyans, and that's all respondents, whether they're registered or not, self-identify with that. And we always like to put the verbatim question at the bottom, at least in English, even if more than half of our interviews were actually conducted in Swahili. Which political party do you support most or feel closest to now, if any? That's followed by, UDA is followed by ODM at 26%, and then Jubilee at 4%, the Roots Party, for the first time appearing at 3%. Still 11% who say they are undecided, and another 12% who do not self-identify with any party, and 5% who declined to answer the question. We have seen, we'll come to that in a minute, across the country, we've just highlighted here the regions where each party is most popular. UDA, to no surprise, is most popular in the Central Rift, ODM at 56%. ODM is most popular in Nyanza, statistically identical percent of 57%. Jubilee, most popular in the mountain area, 8%. Roots Party, identically on Mount Kenya and Central Rift at 4% in both. Wiper Party, most popular, again to no surprise, in Lower Eastern. And then the 3 Western area parties of ANC, DAP Kenya, and Ford Kenya, most popular in Western. And you can also see the variation of undecided, which is highest at the moment in South Rift, followed by Coast, and lowest in the northern part of the country. When we looked at the parties, or the distribution of political party support among 2 groupings in our sample, that is, people who later declared that they intended to vote for Raila Odinga or William Ruto, respectively, we see, not surprisingly, that the parties of which they are leaders, that is Raila for ODM and William Ruto for UDA, that the majority of their support comes from those parties, that is ODM and UDA. Interestingly, though, you can see that there's a kind of bigger lineup of parties behind, among Raila Odinga supporters. Jubilee at 8%, Wiper 4%, and even 3% of people identify with UDA. And likewise, on the Ruto side, he's got, in addition to his 78% support is coming from UDA, 2% from Jubilee, 1% from ODM, 1% from Wiper. So there's a little bit of poaching across the coalition dividing line. But I think the main explanation, I would suggest, as to why William Ruto has more of his support coming from a single party, that is the party he leads, as opposed to Raila Odinga with ODM, that is 78 versus 59%, is, if I recall, the Azimio coalition has 26 parties, whereas the Kenya Kwanza coalition has only 11. So I think that helps to explain why there's more concentrated support among all of Ruto's would-be voters in the party that he leads, that is UDA. And then we asked people if there's any other party that they had supported in the last 10 years, and 44% said yes, there is one, which again is a reflection of the very fluid nature of the political party sort of picture in the country from one election to the next. We have 325 respondents who now identify with UDA, saying yes, they supported another party in the past. 95 of those who now support ODM said the same thing, and 24 of those who now support the Roots Party. And you can see which parties they previously supported. For example, for UDA, we see that 76% of them who supported any other party in the past, that party was Jubilee. And that's not surprising, because we know what's happened, especially on Mount Kenya, once we had the fallout, if I can call it that, between the president and his deputy. Even some current supporters of UDA used to support ODM, 12% of them, and then down the line. On the ODM side, of their 95 current supporters who declared that they had supported some other party in the past, 35% said they used to support Jubilee. Of course, and 6% said they used to support UDA. And since UDA is only about a year and a half old, that shows that some people who are now in ODM, who initially supported UDA, have moved in the last year and a half, which perhaps explains the presidential figures that you'll see shortly. Just as far as the Roots Party of Kenya goes, although as the number is very, very small, you can see that more than a quarter of their current supporters say that they formerly supported ODM, and only 7 from UDA. So we could read into that a tentative hypothesis that presidential candidate Wajakoya is poaching or winning over more supporters from Raila Odinga and ODM than from William Ruto and UDA. Not to say that's his intention. Obviously, he just wants to get as much support as he can. Over the last 2 years now, from June 2020 to June now, we can see a number of fluctuations. We've been tracking this in terms of political parties. And as I said last time, so I can repeat now because this reality hasn't changed, the main or most striking change here is the collapse of Jubilee from 40% 2 years ago to just 4% now. And the other, of course, very striking thing is the rise of UDA from nothing at the end of 2020 to being the most popular party now at 33%. And we can also see the undecided going down. It's come up a bit since our last survey in mid-May, from 13 to 26, but still below what it was previously for the year and a half before that. Distribution of political coalitions now, Azimio and the Kenya Kwanza across the country. Starting on the far left total, Azimio, the most popular one, 42%, followed by Kenya Kwanza. But we can see their strongholds, which largely reflect the strongholds or the dominant positions of political parties, with Kenya Kwanza at 61% in Central Rift and Azimio at 66% in Nyanza. Also, Kenya Kwanza is quite strong on the mountain, just below 50%. Just below 50% in the north, whereas ODM is over 50% in Nairobi and has got half of support of people at the coast and lower eastern. Just to check on the the sort of correspondence between party support and coalition support. When we look overall at the support for Azimio and go into those people, we see that 98% of ODM supporters also support Azimio. A little bit lower for Kenya Kwanza, where 87% of UDA supporters as a party also support the Kenya Kwanza Alliance. But we have nearly a quarter who are undecided as to which coalition they support. Again, that slight difference of 11% between the 98% of ODM supporters supporting Azimio and the 87% of UDA supporters who support Kenya Kwanza may also reflect the fact that it has fewer parties in its coalition, that is 11 as opposed to 26 for Azimio. Turning to the presidential contest, it has fewer parties in its coalition, that is 11. We first asked how important turning to the presidential contest thought the choice of a running mate was to the presidential candidate, how important in terms of getting additional votes. And we see that overall, across choice of a running mate, the whole sample, 2/3, 68% said it's very important. The presidential 12% somewhat important in terms of getting additional votes. And only 15% didn't think it's important at all in terms of who can win the election. Sample, 2/3, 68%. However, interestingly, those who said they were going to support, to vote for Raila Odinga, 15% didn't think it's important at all. Quite a larger percentage were of that view that the choice of a running mate, in this case Martha Karua, is very important in terms of their support for him. A larger percentage, whereas only 62% of those of that view would vote for the choice of a running mate. In this thought case, that his choice of a running mate is very important. And these are reflected also in the fact of another question, whereas only 62% we asked, and that is, how satisfied are you with the choice of a running mate by the presidential candidate also that you were going to vote for? Another question, and among Odinga supporters, and that is, how satisfied 9 out of 10, 90% said that they were very satisfied, by the not somewhat satisfied or dissatisfied, that you were going to vote with the choice of Martha Karua, whereas only 2/3 of those who said they were going to vote for 9 out of 10, 90% President Ruto, very satisfied. Had that opinion, that is, that they are very satisfied with the choice of Rigathi. Whereas only 2/3 of those who said they were going to vote doesn't mean they're not going to vote for him. Deputy President Ruto still said they were going to vote for the DP. Had that opinion, that is, that they are very satisfied. You can see quite a contrast there, way outside the margin of error for the survey. Doesn't mean they're not going to vote for him. Plus or minus 2.5%. They still said they were going to vote for the DP. How much the choice of a running mate, way outside the margin of error, how much that will actually affect the election on August 9th is a fascinating question. How much it's been discussed a lot choice of a running mate and by political players. How much that will actually affect. We hope that this will give the election on August 9th evidence of what the answer to that question might be. It's been discussed a lot in the media. The presidential figures themselves. First time the appearance of George Wajakoya at 4%, and then we have another 14% who didn't give us an answer to this question. Plus or minus 2.7 is the margin of error. So as I said, this lead of Odinga's is just barely outside of that margin of error, but still measurable. Across the country, the Raila Karua ticket pair scores highest in Nyanza, 2/3, 68%, quite high in Nairobi at 58%, a clear majority. The Ruto Gachagua ticket scores highest in Central Rift and quite high in Northern Kenya. And the Wajakoya Wamai ticket highest in South Rift and in Lower Eastern, followed by Mount Kenya. Again, whether that percentage as of now overall by Wajakoya and Wamai of 4% is enough to throw the election into a runoff contest remains to be seen. But for the two main candidates, it's not surprising that they have the highest ratings in their home areas, even if we know from census and other data that both Nyanza and Central Rift are multi-ethnic, and therefore those figures are nowhere near 100%, even aside from the ethnic factor. To look at a change in the standing of these two candidates between our previous survey in the middle of May and this one that came 5 weeks later at the end of June, just looking at the Ruto-Gachagua pair, we can see that they have gained 4% from 35 to 39, with their highest gain being in northern Kenya of 15%, and with their biggest loss in the South Rift of 1/3, keeping in mind that those regional samples are quite small, so there are margins of errors here to be taken into account. Also a solid gain for the DP and his running mate in Nairobi of 9%, and also in Western Kenya. Turning to the change between those two surveys for the Odinga Karua ticket, he has also gained, but by 3% rather than 4%, and he's gained especially in the South Rift, 17%, and Lower Eastern. And we can assume that the gain in Lower Eastern is mainly attributed to the fact that former Vice President Kalonzo Musyoka withdrew his presidential bid and is now campaigning as part of the Azimio campaign effort. And Raila has also gained in 9% in Nairobi. And one of the reasons, or the main reason, as you can see from the trend chart, that both Odinga and Ruto have gained from, compared to TIFA's last survey, from 39 to 42 for Raila, from 35 to 39 for William Ruto, is because of the decline of those who said they were undecided. In this case, from May to June, from 14 to 10%, and those who didn't give a response to the question by half, from 8 to 4%. So whereas 6 weeks ago, we had 22% of our respondents who wouldn't answer the question, who are you going to vote for as of now, that's dropped almost in half to 14%. As we have seen this happening in all our survey work over the last 4 elections now. The closer we get to election, the easier it is, or the more pressure there is on people to make up their minds. Going a little bit deeper into the figures, looking at gender and age, we can see that Odinga and Karua are markedly more popular among men than women, even if Martha Karua is herself a woman. And statistically, there's no difference between younger voters, that is 18 to 24, and older voters, 35 and older, 43, 42, statistically identical. Interestingly, for Ruto and Gachagua, their support between the two genders is statistically identical. 40 versus 38 is pretty much the same. So this gender gap that exists for Odinga and Karua is not present for Ruto and Gachagua. In other words, we can say, at least in this survey, the Raila Odinga Martha Karua ticket can thank the men for the lead of 3% that they enjoy overall. As far as age goes, for the Ruto-Gachagua ticket, just outside the margin of error, slightly more support among older people. It is 38 versus 41. But making an impression, when we come to the Wajakoya and Wamai ticket, we see, sticking with age, more than 3 times more support among younger voters for them. That is 7% versus only 2% among people 35 and over. Among the undecideds, gender, we have 3 times as more women as men who say they haven't made up their mind, and twice as many who wouldn't answer the question. Not much of a difference in terms of age. Slightly more older people who haven't decided or who wouldn't give us a response. Again, looking at the trend over the last 2 years by gender, as Raila Odinga and now with Martha Karua's support has risen from its low point a year ago when Raila was only at 11%, the gap between the genders has basically not changed. It's been about 10% ever since the end of 2021 and throughout this year, February, April, May, and now June. So notwithstanding a lot of attention to the presence of Martha Karua on the ticket in terms of attracting votes from women, we don't see that in our data. What we do see is an increase in their standing of likely voters for both of them as a pair. Even if, as you can see, going back to November of last year, Raila started to rise steadily even before it was known who his running mate was. We were having a discussion about this issue yesterday at the forum, and I had suggested that if there's going to be a gender impact of Karua on the Raila Karua ticket, it might not be in survey data, but it might be in voter turnout on the day. In terms of the commitment of women, or it might not. I mean, we won't know until we see what the voting data is. As we saw from our data from just this survey, over the last 2 years, there really hasn't been any gender gap for William Ruto and now with Rigathi Gachagua. It's been pretty close, fluctuating a little bit, sometimes more support from women, such as in November 2021. I guess that's the only time that figure was above that for men, but not nearly the margin that we saw in this previous slide, above 10% for Raila, and now Raila with Martha. It's much closer to gender parity for William Ruto. In terms of income, we see just a very minor contrast here, where supporters of Raila Odinga and now Martha Karua slightly better off than those of the deputy president and his running mate, Gachagua, but really almost within the margin of error. For example, if we just take those who reported, and these are just household heads, because we can't compare household heads with household dependents. We have, for example, 21% who reported that they're earning more than 20,000 shillings a month who would vote for Raila Odinga, and 18% earning 20,000 shillings above who said they vote for William Ruto. And at the lower end of the monthly income, that is nothing to 5,000, we have 31% who said they would vote for Raila Odinga, 33% for William Ruto, and now with his running mate. Again, these figures are so close, we can't say that there's any wealth basis or poverty basis of political support for this choice of the 2 presidential candidates. But just 2 points. Number one, in the last 3 elections, when we looked at this sort of data, in all 3 of them, supporters for Raila Odinga were much poorer, considerably poorer, than those for 2007 for the late Mwai Kibaki, and in 2013 and 2017 than the supporters of Uhuru Kenyatta, that is voters for him. So now it's even. And that leads to the second point, and we see this if we look at maps of where these campaigns are moving over the landscape, except perhaps for their ethnic home areas. They're competing for the same voters with basically the same economic messages, because they're appealing to people who are in the same economic condition, largely, at least in terms of monthly income, which is quite different from politics in many highly developed and economically stratified countries. Evaluations of the Jubilee government and of the president. We first asked our respondents to name 2 successes of the Jubilee government since the last election, and we made this comparison of Ruto and Odinga supporters. We see very little difference. Both of them, by a majority or almost a majority, identify infrastructure. More of Odinga supporters identified peace and security as one of the 2 answers that they could give to this question. 8% versus just 3% to those people who said they would vote for William Ruto, and the rest are pretty close. Please, I'm sorry I have to say this, but when people in media, when we report this data, don't say that only 2% of Kenyans think that jobs and employment was a success of Jubilee. People were given the chance to give only 2 answers. So what you see here are just their priorities, their top 2 priorities. They weren't read out these different answers at all and then ask, do you think Jubilee has succeeded? So we hope that can be reported correctly. Interestingly, 29% of Ruto supporters couldn't or wouldn't give us any success of the Jubilee government, and I think we know the reasons for that, but even a fifth, 22% of Odinga supporters were unable or unwilling to identify any area of policy implementation success of the outgoing government. We asked the same question about failures, perceived failures. Again, people were given only 2 choices. The answers were not read out. To no surprise, cost of living was the highest for both, statistically identical, 47% and 49%. Problems in education, again, second, rated by Odinga supporters, and third by, there was third for both of them. Because second, economic growth was noted as a failure by 22% of Ruto supporters, 17% of Odinga's. Yes, education was second for Odinga supporters at 19% and third for Ruto supporters at 15%. We know there's been lots of problems in the education sector, disruption and so on. Corruption, slightly more Odinga supporters mention that than Ruto supporters in terms of the government's failures to deal effectively with corruption. Jobs and unemployment, rather more, 5% more of Odinga supporters mentioned that. The rest are basically the same. A little difference with agriculture, slightly more Ruto supporters mentioning that, 6 versus 4% of Odinga supporters, and the same figures for peace and security. And of course, divisions in the government, leadership wrangles. But remember, again, sorry to repeat, we only gave people a chance to give 2 responses. Very few people mentioned COVID-19 response as a failure, only 1% of Odinga's and none of Ruto supporters. Those who didn't know of any or refused to give any failures, about the same, within the margin of error, 15% by Ruto supporters and 13%. So you can see, notwithstanding the fact that the president is supporting Raila Odinga's campaign and that the deputy president has talked on various occasions about his estrangement from the government, we still have by far the majority of people who say they're going to vote for the deputy president who could give some answer. But if we just go back here, we've got more than 2/3 of his supporters who give credit to the government for some successes. And as I say, only 15% who couldn't name any failure, 13% of Raila's supporters who couldn't name any failure. For the approval rating of the president as an individual leader, the most important in the country, we asked people on a scale of 0 to 5 to rate his performance since the last election, where 0 was very bad and 5 was very good. And we have a plurality of about 1/3, 35%, who give him a medium rating, That's a 3, which is in the middle, and the rest is distributed pretty evenly. When we look at this approval rating through the lens of people's preferred next president, at least looking at the two main contenders, we see that more than half of Odinga supporters give the president a rating of 4 or 5. That's good and very good combined. And only 29% who give him only 29% of Ruto supporters give him that top rating. And then conversely, we only have a fifth of Raila's would-be voters, 21%, who give the president the worst rating, or the combined of bad and very bad. But again, slightly more than half of Ruto supporters who give him that very bad rating. So we can see that notwithstanding the current contest for power and the position of the president in that contest on Raila's side, we don't have an overwhelming contrast of a 0 versus 100 in terms of these ratings of the president's performance, which shows that even a highly polarized pre-election environment, some people on each side are able to take the contrasting opinion from what most of their fellow presidential supporters are taking. Finally, a few other correlations that relate to the election, as Maggie had said. We first look at level of confidence in the IEBC to manage a fair and honest election. And we see that somewhere between half and 2/3, 60% overall, have the highest level of confidence. They're very confident. Only 17% are not confident at all. And when we look at the contrast between Odinga and Ruto supporters, we see a little less confidence on the Odinga side in terms of the highest level, 59%, versus nearly 2/3 on the Ruto side who have that highest level. And that shouldn't be surprising. We remember that when Raila Odinga presented his papers to the IEBC, he read off a list of 10 reform demands, which he said were left over from the Supreme Court's nullification of the 2017 election, which he wanted to address before this election. We've even heard the Deputy President in the last couple of days challenging Raila Odinga to boycott this election if he's not satisfied with the level of IEBC preparedness. We've seen their disagreement over the voter register, which seems to have been worked out now. But in our next survey, closer to the election, we'll want to track this over. Ideally, all Kenyans should have 100% support in IEBC, in the electoral management body, whatever their intentions of voting. So we see that even if there's not much difference between the two main candidates, IEBC still has some work to do in convincing Kenyans that they should benefit from a complete level of confidence in the way they're going to administer this next election. After the election, of course, there's the possibility of a petition. And so we thought it's not too early to ask this question as to how much confidence Kenyans have in the Supreme Court to deal with a petition without any outside interference or bias, which was the question. We get almost the identical figures as we had for level of confidence in IEBC. 60% overall said yes, and this was just a yes or no question. A quarter who say no, that they don't have that confidence. And again, there's, well, even less of a difference between supporters of Odinga and Ruto in terms of their view of the Supreme Court's ability to handle any election petition, basically mirroring the national figures. Again, we would like to see these positive figures at 100%, but we know that that's unlikely. And even if the Supreme Court showed its independence, both in the 2017 petition that nullified that election, and then more recently in the BBI case, where it had approved some of the claims in the petition and rejected others. But again, in the next survey that we'll do closer to the election, we'll see if these numbers change at all. And then finally, I think, we asked a more general question. What do Kenyans think is the main motivation of people who contest elections, whether it's for president, for MCA? And we gave them two choices. We didn't ask them just openly. We read these out. A, for the benefit of their community and their country, or B, for their own personal or family interests. We did not read out not sure as a choice, but of course it was there for capturing the data. And we see a slight majority, 53%, have this, I would say, a negative view, that they think the main motivation for people to contest elections is for their own interests. Only slightly more than a third, 38%, believe that their main interest is for the benefit of their community and country. And you can see in the question, we didn't make any distinction between people who run for one office or another. Between the two political parties, people who support them, no difference statistically. Looking at the supporters for Odinga versus Ruto, we see a slightly higher percentage of Odinga's supporters who think that these political or electoral contestants do it, stand for their own benefit or their family's benefit. 55% versus those who say they're going to vote for the deputy president. Not huge, but a measurable difference, which we could maybe discuss the reasons behind that in another forum. So we hope that that completes the presentation, and we hope that anybody who has questions will get in touch with us. Perhaps just a very quick review of our methodology. As Maggie said, when the data were collected, the zones which we are using, and we are happy to see one other survey company using the same units for data presentation now. The respondents, the number, and the margin of error. And then in the release which will be sent out, you will see, if you have forgotten, which counties are in which of our zones. As required by the publication of the Electoral Polls Act, we reported that information on the sample and also education level. We also show our distribution by zone, by setting, urban, rural, and by age, even if that's not required in the Act. So we look forward to helping you in any way you can when you're reporting the data. Although it's a holiday today, we hope everyone is enjoying it, especially our Muslim friends. But everybody else is also having a day to relax, if that's what they're doing. But we will be available to answer any questions as you prepare your reports on this release. Sante ni sana.